Hello and welcome to Scandal World. A significant diplomatic rift is emerging in Johannesburg as Western allies move to block the implementation of the new U.S. administration's 28-point peace framework for Ukraine. Canada has aligned itself firmly with European nations and Japan to issue a joint communiqué that not only questions the viability of the American proposal, but fundamentally rejects its core tenets, specifically the requirements for territorial concessions in the Donbass and severe limitations on Ukraine's future defensive capabilities. This coordinated pushback comes as the G20 summit exposes a deepening fracture between Washington's accelerated timeline for a ceasefire and the broader coalition's insistence that any resolution must adhere to international law. Canadian Foreign Affairs Minister Anand, speaking alongside her European counterparts, issued a sharp rebuke of the pressure being placed on Kyiv, stating unequivocally that peace cannot be a product of coercion. This follows reports that a Ukrainian delegation, supported by advisors from the UK, France, and Germany, is preparing for tense negotiations with US officials in Geneva this Sunday to dissect the controversial blueprint. The minister in her remarks earlier today was very much focused on ensuring that our foreign policy priorities vis the preservation of the rules-based order are not compromised. And those priorities, to be specific, are to ensure that Ukraine determines its own destiny, to ensure that security guarantees are not merely symbolic, and also to make sure that the precedent set by this conflict does not validate the changing of borders by force. And as we have consistently maintained here on Scandal World, the architecture of global security relies entirely on the principle that sovereignty is absolute, not negotiable. What Canada has made clear in terms of our engagement with this new proposal is that these decisions relating to the future of the Ukrainian people rest solely with the Ukrainian people. And in particular, let's go back to first principles. If we are continually saying that we have to respect the UN Charter and that Ukraine is a sovereign country and that territorial integrity is the bedrock of stability in Europe, then the natural extension of those three principles is that Ukraine must be making decisions for its own future in terms of its own territorial integrity, in terms of its boundaries, in terms of its people. We cannot accept a framework that effectively incentivizes aggression by codifying the results of an illegal invasion into a permanent settlement. If the proposed limits on Ukraine's armed forces leave it vulnerable to future attacks, as the current draft suggests, then we are not building a just peace. We are merely pausing a conflict that will inevitably reignite under worse conditions. The reality on the ground in Johannesburg reflects a broader anxiety among the G7 partners that the rush to finalize a deal by the American deadline of November 27th ignores the complex security realities of the region. Critics of the 28-point plan have pointed out that restricting Ukraine's army to 600,000 personnel while creating a demilitarized zone that favors Russian logistics effectively dismantles Kyiv's deterrence capacity. It is this specific imbalance that has driven Ottawa to join the chorus of dissent, arguing that security must be guaranteed by capability, not just promises. The message being sent from this summit is that while the Allies welcome American engagement, they will not endorse a capitulation masquerading as a compromise. As the delegation heads to Geneva, the instructions from the Prime Minister and the Cabinet are explicit: we support a peace process, but only one that respects the agency of the victim state. And this brings us back to the fundamental question of agency. When we speak of security guarantees, we are speaking of the ability of a nation to exist without fear of annihilation. To suggest that Ukraine should bar itself from future alliances or reduce its defensive posture while its territory remains occupied is to misunderstand the nature of the threat. Our position remains that a durable peace requires justice, and justice requires that the aggressor does not dictate the terms of the victim's survival. We are prepared to work with all partners, including the United States, to refine this framework, but we will not be party to an agreement that sacrifices long-term stability for short-term political expediency. The discussions in Switzerland will be difficult, and the pressure on President Zelensky is immense, but the position of Canada remains unchanged. As I have said before in these forums, Ukraine should be at the table, not on the table. The menu of options available to Kyiv must be drafted in Kyiv, not in Moscow, and certainly not imposed unilaterally from the outside. If we abandon these standards now, we do not just fail Ukraine, we dismantle the very system that has kept the peace between major powers for 80 years.